Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. In this video, I'm going to be finishing off a project that is about 4 years in the making. Since I started the army back in 2020, I've been slowly building it up and adding to it, but the intention was always to have a monolith as the centerpiece for the army and to add a tree growing out the top of it. Right from the very beginning, I had an idea in my head of exactly what I wanted it to look like, and it was really just a case of working out how to go about bringing that to life. So, about 4 years after actually coming up with the idea in the first place, and about 18 months ago since I actually bought the model, and then 6 months ago I actually built the tree and got it ready, I'm actually starting to paint it now. I've actually felt very daunted by this whole process, because it's very difficult sometimes to get these ideas out of my head and to try and make them into a reality. And I just needed this to work and for it to go how I wanted it, and to get that image in my head out and have it sat on the desk so I could actually see it for real. So the first part of this process is actually something that I do with all of my Necrons, is to add some PVA glue and to scatter on a mix of very fine sand and tile grout. This is a way of adding texture for the areas which are going to have sort of moss and plant life growing on it. I find that this, I'd rather go down this process than adding flock later. I just prefer the way it looks. This is where I can paint it and I can kind of have a bit more control over the colours and the way it looks. I try to be quite selective about where I'm putting this as well. I'm not covering the entire thing. It's going to be only in certain areas and patches. Again, I've got the idea in my head of what it's going to look like, and I'm trying to get that sort of translated onto the real thing. And this process is also partly one of the reasons why I've been putting it off, because I know I've added the tree already, but this is just another layer added on that I can't remove if it goes wrong, or if I do something that that doesn't work. It's a very expensive model. It's by far the most expensive one that I've ever bought. I think it's about £110 in the UK at the moment, and I can't afford to buy another one if it goes wrong. So this is really the reason why I've been putting it off, because I was kind of a bit too scared to really start it, because I didn't want to mess it up and for it to come out not looking how I wanted it. So that was then left for about 24 hours for all of the glue to dry, to get all of that tile grout and sand nice and solid, and then re-primed as well to have sort of a nice uniform colour to start with. I then went back in with, I think it's dark aluminium through my airbrush to give everything a metallic coat as the first layer for everything. Been quite rushed with that. Doesn't matter if it gets on the tree or goes anywhere else. Just to get everything started. Firstly, apologies about the slightly out of focus footage here. I'm still finding filming while painting quite difficult. So the next step, once all of that metallic was on, was to go over the entire thing with a mix of Garagax sewer and rattling grime. It's been quite heavily watered down, and just slap that all over all of the areas which are painted up in the metallics. So it's kind of like the outer layers of the monolith. And then once that was on, I've then used a bit of paper towel, just kind of remove all the excess, so it's more sort of sitting in the recesses, but also slightly staining the metallic as well, to kind of dirty everything down, and but not to leave any kind of blotchy, messy paint on the outside as well. So the next step was just to go back in with the rattling grime and just to pick out some of the details with that, just to give a little bit more definition in certain places, just the kind of the deeper recess and things, just to kind of tidy things up a little bit, and any areas that got missed with the initial wash. Yeah, again, I'm not being too sort of precious with this, just kind of getting it in and about where I need it, and it doesn't really matter too much if certain areas get missed, because there are going to be other colours laid on top of this after this as well. This is really just kind of an initial stage, just to kind of see what I'm working with, and just to kind of make sure that those details are standing out as much as they need to. So the next step is to start adding the green, which is going to be on the areas where we're going to have the plant life and things growing. I'm just using this through my airbrush. It's Creed Camo, which is a contrast paint. just to put a thin layer over the top of the areas where I want this to be. This is the initial colour for the green. It's going to then be covered back up again, so that metallic isn't going to be showing through when it's done, but this will help me to kind of blend the metallic and the green areas together by leaving some of this showing around the edges of the green sort of plant patches that are going to be on it. So it's not kind of like a stark line between the green and the metal starting. I purposely chose to add far more of the green onto the side of the monolith with the tree growing out of it. So we're going to have far more plant life on that side and then less on the other side, which is going to have more of the metallic showing. Just to add some contrast to it and make it slightly less uniform and a bit more, make it feel a bit more natural. Once that first layer of green was down, I then used the airbrush to start painting in the tree. This is Thondir brown, which is a nice kind of rich, almost sort of chocolatey brown colour. The tree would then get more colour added to it later because I didn't want it to just be a flat brown. Because actually, if you look at trees, they don't really tend to be just brown. They kind of have sort of greys and all sorts of different colours in them if you actually look at them properly up close. So I wanted this to be reasonably realistic. So more colour will be added to it later, but this acted as a nice sort of base for it. Being quite liberal with this, just chucking paint on, it doesn't really matter if it gets anywhere else on the model at this point. It's all going to kind of get blended together later on, but this was quite a long process, and trying to get all of those branches done, quite fiddly, but yeah, got there eventually. And then went back in with Catachan flesh, I think this is, just to kind of start adding a little bit of highlights to it as well, just to kind of add some different patches of colour, so that when it was dry brushed and washed later, there would be a little bit more variation as well. I then used Castellan green through the airbrush just to add the next layer of the green, and to help blend the tree and the green patches together as well. So all of the green areas got a second layer of this over the top, and the roots got some as well, just in smaller patches and up towards the base of the tree as well, just to help blend the two together to help everything stay a bit more natural. With those initial colours down, I then turned my attention to the four obelisk bits that sit inside the monolith and gave them a coat of Stegodon green, which is actually blue. I don't know why it's called Stegodon green. But yeah, this was just kind of, so I could put it together off camera and just kind of get an idea of the colours, just to make sure it was all kind of starting to work how I was envisioning it in my head. So while that was drying, I then added the wash to the tree and the textured mossy areas on the monolith. So this is Agrex Earthshade, being very liberal with this, just chucking it on and then getting some water, quite dirty paint water actually by the looks of it, I mean, and then use that to kind of blend it all together as well. Any kind of patchy areas would get covered up later because there's going to be more green and more colours added to the top, but this was just, again, just kind of, I wanted certain areas to be darker, some to be lighter, not to have a uniform feel to everything. Once that was dry, I then dry brushed the tree, firstly with Catachan flesh to bring the colour back, and then slowly adding some lighter greys into that Catachan flesh, and then slowly building up the highlights on it. Again, as I said earlier, if you actually look at a tree close up, they do tend to have more sort of greys and in them, especially towards the outside of the bark and things as well. So this acted like quite a nice highlight colour. So the next step for the green was to add some highlights to it. So I'm using Strachan green here, and I do this with all of my Necrons. I don't like to dry brush this. I like to have a bit more control because I don't want to have sort of like uniform colour all over. So I just pick out certain areas with this, and yeah, just basically go over the whole thing with a very small brush and just kind of pick out all of the highlights. This is actually one of the longer steps in the process. It's not too bad when you're painting the infantry and all of the smaller models, but something this size, this did take quite a while. I think it was worth it in the end though, because it allowed me to have quite a lot of control over it. And obviously then going in and adding a highlight as well, a very rough, scratchy highlight to the actual monolith areas as well. And that rough, scratchy highlight is also going to help to add more texture and to sort of play into the idea of being sort of covered in moss and plant life. I then build that colour up and add more highlight layers over the top, which is what I'm doing now, by adding Phalanx yellow into that Strachan green, just a little bit at a time, and slowly building up the highlights and focusing more and more towards the raised edges, and just being more sparing with it as I go. So the brighter the colour, the less goes on, and keeping it more towards the very edges, up until the point where I'm actually just adding pure phalanx yellow, which is a really, really bright yellow. But if that's used quite sparingly, just on the very edges and the very most raised points, it really does help to add to that nice bright green colour, rather than just using a pure green as the final highlight. I actually quite really like the way it looks. It is a particularly bright yellow, but again, if you use it very sparingly, it does actually work really well. So the next step is to start adding Stegadon CL green, which is definitely blue, to the areas of the monolith that are going to be glowing later on, that have energy coming from them. So like these kind of coil bits on the side and the weapons. With that done, it's now time to add the tufts, which is one of my favourite bits. I've got a bit of a collection of these that I've picked up. They're mainly from a company called Gamer's Grass. Really highly recommended, really good quality ones. So these are just added some nice, good quality PVA to make sure they're not going to come off at any point, and just sticking them on here and there, and slowly building them up, being quite selective where they go. These are, again, from Gamer's Grass. They are they're laser cut plants that come flat. You pop them out and you bend them into the right shape and stick them down. Really, really good quality stuff. Love them. Use them on all of my Necrons and would highly recommend those. Right from the beginning, I decided the center column of the monolith was going to be a different color to the outside, to help to add some contrast and just kind of break it all up a little bit. I felt like it would be a bit too much if it was all just the same color. So I kept it black, and then did a very rough chunky highlight of Stegadon Scale Green, followed up by a second highlight of Temple Guard Blue, and then finishing off the very edges using Baharoth Blue. So these are the same blues that are then used for the weapons and things as well. So it would help to kind of tie them all together, but also keep this area of the monolith looking different to the outside. Just kind of add some more contrast and make it look a bit more interesting. I then used those same colours through my airbrush to add the highlights to the sort of the four columns that sit inside of the monolith. I get just slowly building them up to get a nice blend from the darker blue at the very bottom up to a nice light blue at the top, adding a little bit more white in as well for the very, very final highlight at the top of that. And now to add the glow effect as well. So this is Temple Guard Blue, and just hitting the center of all of the kind of the areas which are going to be having the energy on them, and slowly building that color up towards the outside. Also, before starting this airbrush highlight, I'd added in all of the metallic areas as well on the central column. So like the cables on the outside and this kind of this area that holds the big energy ball at the top, because I wanted those to be affected by the blue highlight as it was sprayed on. So I did those off camera. But yeah, and then just slowly building up the that Temple Guard Blue, and then adding a little bit more white into it as I'm spraying. So to slowly build that highlight up. I want it to be quite exaggerated, really dark on the outside, and then nice and bright, almost to white on the very most highlighted points. And then as a final highlight on the four columns, I just did an edge highlight of Gauss Blaster Green on this, just to finish them off and just to make it feel like they were sort of glowing. And no forest would be complete without some wildlife. So I added a few little bugs here and there hidden away, and these are just painted up 3D printed ones that I bought from a company called ROK Minis. Highly recommended. I'll make sure there's a link in the description for them, so please go and have a look. They've got some really good stuff. With all of the painting done, I then wrapped the monolith in cling film to keep it safe, because the next step was going to be adding the foliage to the tree. I really had no idea how this was going to work, so this was a kind of a bit of a shot in the dark about, the process. So once I was very confident that that cling film was on properly and no glue was going to get through, and I double and triple checked this because I was very paranoid I was going to destroy all the work I'd done at this point, I then started to give everything a liberal spray with a mix of PVA glue and water to start slowly building up the foliage on the tree. Initially, I started doing this just by sprinkling it on, and I found this didn't work. So I then started to actually have to manually adding it in by painting the glue directly onto the branches and sticking it on by hand. This took a very long time. I didn't get much footage of it, but yeah, I assure you this took a long time to get done. I used a mix of a light and a dark green clump foliage that I'd kind of broken up and mixed together to kind of give some variation in the colours. I built this up over about 5 or 6 different layers over about a week, leaving each one to dry overnight. And as a final touch, when it was done, the one thing I really wanted to do was to add some birds in the tree. So again, these are from the same ROK minis, nice little 3D printed birds, painted white, and a couple of them stuck in the branches. And that was it. It was finished. From start to finish, from initially putting that glue on the outside to add the sand and everything, to this finished result, took me about a month. I honestly couldn't be happier with it. It's exactly how I wanted it to look. I'm genuinely proud of it. I know it's ridiculous. It's far too big. It's incredibly practical, but it's exactly what I wanted, and I'm genuinely really pleased with it. If you've enjoyed the video and you've enjoyed watching this process, then please consider hitting the subscribe button and leaving a like and a comment. I would love to know what you think. This has been 4 years of planning and it's finally done, and I'm genuinely so pleased with it. As always, thank you so much for watching and for all the support. I'll see you all soon.